And I want to thank Hugh, who is over there, for hosting us, and now is here, for hosting us this afternoon. I just held the second of what I hope will be a series of roundtables to really focus on what we can do to come up with common sense solutions to address the problem of curbing gun violence, and actually after this really informative discussion to take a hard look at what we can do to approach the issue of reducing violence in general in this country, because we've seen the statistics, and the violence compared to violence in other countries in the United States is really it's appalling, and something needs to be done. Now, some of you know that earlier this month I hosted another roundtable discussion with elected officials as well as law enforcement agencies, mental health professionals, to directly hear from them about what's happening right here in South Florida. And as a state legislator and now a member of Congress, and as a parent, I've been an advocate for sensible gun safety measures and reducing gun violence for my entire career. And that's why I was really moved when my friend Jim Cummings reached out to me after the Newtown tragedy to give me his thoughts on, as an NRA member, a life NRA member, as an owner of 150 guns, as an avid hunter, what his thoughts were about the steps that we should take that were common sense, that would address the problem, at the same time balancing the Second Amendment rights of gun owners and people who support the Second Amendment. Now, as horrific as the Newtown tragedy is, it's only symptomatic of a larger violence problem in this nation, where more than 10,000 American lives are lost each year. The culture of gun violence is deep-rooted, and it won't be easy to change. But and I can tell you from this discussion that we had today, there are some short-term and long-term things that I learned that gun rights owners believe that we can do, and that we have to take. The thing that I came away from this roundtable discussion that hit home the most was that we can't adopt an attitude that there's just one thing that we can do and all the gun violence is going to go away. That we have to take a long-term, comprehensive approach so that we can really address this problem once and for all, and that there are short-term solutions that we can propose and pass as well. One of those, and probably that had the most universal support among this group, was making sure that we adopt universal background checks and make sure that the law reflects everyone's desire to prevent people who shouldn't have a gun from being able to access one, any kind of gun. That's really important and critical. We know that 40%, according to ATF, we know that 40% of gun sales in this country are transacted without a background check. And there's, from this discussion that we had today, all of these folks believe that there's nothing wrong with making sure that every transaction goes through a background check. And there was a pretty intense discussion about that. The other things that we discussed that were important, and this is dealing specifically with the President's proposals, were beyond closing the background checks, but making schools safer. And this also came up in the roundtable that we did a few weeks ago. There is pretty universal support in our community here in South Florida that putting a school resource officer in the schools to make sure that there is a deterrent, and also as a safety measure, it would be a positive step. And again, that by itself, not a one-size-fits-all solution, not going to solve all the problems, but definitely a step in the right direction. And then the importance of increasing access to mental health services, which is also in the President's proposal. We've got to make sure that, and everyone here agreed, that we address the mental health community and the mental health challenges that too many Americans face who aren't treated, and who so often we learn are people who have been suffering for a long time, and no one got them into the system to get the treatment that they need. So at the end of the day, I think we need to do a lot more listening than we do chattering about how to solve these problems. And for me, the best way to hear from all people of all different perspectives is to hold these roundtables with folks in our community and get their perspective. And so I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that today, and really want to turn it over to Jim and our other friends here to share some of their thoughts. Jim?
Well, first I just would like to thank you, Debbie, for giving us the opportunity to voice our opinions. I'm sure what you found out here today was this is a pretty divergent group, but there are certain things that we can agree on. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's more than just banning the gun, that everything has to be taken into consideration. One thing that we universally agreed on was the universal background check. And there are other issues that I'm sure with further discussion that we can agree on. And I hope this will bring some resolution to the problem we have today in America, which is gun violence going wild. Thank you.
Anyone else want to share anything, or we can go ahead?
Well, it's not just gun violence, it's violence in America, period. I think to term it as gun violence is a misnomer. One of the proposals that President Obama has made is to fund the Centers of Disease Control to do some research on gun violence in America. And my comment was, change that to violence in America. What is the root cause of violence in America? And I think it will do wonders to find out why we have a society that is as violent as it is.
Could you say and spell your name for us, please, sir?
Mine? Rick. Last name's Derrer, D-E-R-R-E-R.
And we'd be glad to take any questions.
Congressman, your name has come up today, unfortunately, with Dr. Solomon Melgen in West Palm Beach.
We'd be glad to take any questions about gun violence and the topic of the day.
Okay, we'll ask you this. In terms of the insights you gained today, what would you take back with you to Washington, with what you've learned?
Well, the reason that I wanted to have a roundtable with these folks who are all either NRA members or hunters, and certainly all consider themselves strong supporters of the Second Amendment, is that the only way that we're going to achieve consensus is by bringing everyone into this debate who, from all sides, and considering all opinions. I think that there are a lot of good ideas out there about how to address gun violence and address violence in general in a short-term and long-term way, but my philosophy has always been you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and we've got to make sure that we can bring everyone around the table and setting aside the fringe elements of this debate, which and quite honestly I think that the comments coming from the NRA leadership in the last few weeks, since Newtown especially, have been fairly fringe. I mean, they oppose funding for some of the research that these folks here support, and you just have to scratch your head and wonder how they could see around every corner, every proposal being one step closer to confiscation. None of these folks here, are concerned about research on violence. I mean, ATF is actually, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency is actually prohibited by law from doing research into gun violence, because the NRA insists that if you do that, then that's one step closer to confiscation. So we've got to bring everybody into this discussion and this debate and build consensus so that we can finally really do something.
Congresswoman, did anything surprise you in this afternoon's discussion? Something that maybe you would learn that you didn't know? I knew that this group really all shared similar opinions to Jim, whose views are more well known to me. I was pleasantly surprised that the universal background checks was something that they were entirely comfortable with. Some even comfortable with the idea of a waiting period. That the person-to-person sales should be subject to background checks, and that from what I gathered, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but that if you're able to do that, then you are much more likely, in this group's opinion, to go pretty far along in getting people who should not have access to weapons off and prevent them from being able to have them. And the other important thing is to make sure that we are getting everyone who should be in the database in the country that is either a known felon or has been not even adjudicated mentally ill, but has a previous problem with mental illness and a potential criminal history. It was interesting to me that many of the folks here felt that a federalized database, so that you could, federalized background checks so that you wouldn't have to worry about whether 30 states like we have now are not putting all the information into those databases, are doing that.
You saw your friend, Gabby Giffords, testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee today.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you?
Well, I was really incredibly proud of her, as I have been throughout this whole this whole nightmare that she's been through. She was prepared, as she always is. She really, I thought, was resolute, and the way she delivered her testimony showed how passionate she is and how strongly she felt about it. I mean, Gabby Giffords, everybody should remember, is a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, is a gun owner, has a legislative record that has always made it clear that she supports gun rights and the rights of gun owners. So I think the message that she carried today with her husband, Mark Kelly, carried even more weight, because obviously she's been a victim of gun violence, but she's speaking them from the perspective of being a supporter of the Second Amendment.
There's also such pressure right now to find a solution so quickly. You mentioned short-term and long-term solutions. Mm-hmm. Can you describe a bit of what those may be?
Sure. I mean, the short-term solutions that we discussed were universal background checks. There was not total consensus in the group on high-capacity magazines, but for the most part, that was something that a lot of the people here thought could be part of the solution. One of the things that was really stressed in our whole discussion was you can't just take any one of these things and short-term and by itself say, if we just do this, then problem solved. So that, and a comprehensive solution is going to take a while. We know that we can address the problem in the short term by doing some of these things to address access to weapons, making sure you have the background checks, possibly dealing with the high-capacity magazines, making schools safer by putting school resource officers, armed school resource officers in the schools, and funding mental health services. But over the long term, we had testimony in our task force last week that Jim testified at that showed a potential correlation between a third-grade education and an individual's ultimate likelihood of committing violence. We have to make a commitment to equal access to quality education, and we have to address the issue of the cycle of violence in some communities that perpetuates itself through generations, and the unemployment, the continuing cycle of unemployment generation to generation in some communities, and that those things are all part of long-term issues that we need to address, and that was a lot of what we discussed.
And was the consensus on background checks also applicable to gun shows as well? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, closing the gun show loophole, making sure that personal sales were subject to background checks in some way, being practical about how you do that, and just making sure that if there's a transaction for a weapon in this country, that we have a background check system in place to make sure that if someone shouldn't have a weapon by law, that they can't get access to one.
The NRA leadership is opposed to that.
Yeah, they are.
Can we get from one of the gentlemen how you differ from the NRA leadership?
Yeah, I totally agree with the universal background checks. I'm a life member of the NRA. I think, just because Wayne LaPierre gets up there and makes a statement and says we have 4.5 million people and here's a position, doesn't mean that's everybody's position, because quite frankly, most of the people here are NRA members as well, and that's not our position. So how do we disagree? We don't think he's right.
And the statistics, the surveys that have been done of NRA members that have been released, it shows like 70% of NRA members believe that we should have universal background checks, and and are supporters of a lot of these common sense proposals that have been put out there. So we just need to make sure that the voices of these common sense gun rights supporters of the Second Amendment are out there, and that's the way that I'm able to help get those voices out there, is by bringing them together to talk with me as a policymaker, and then standing here with them so that people can see the faces and hear the voices of strong Second Amendment supporters, avid hunters, people who own lots of guns, who believe that that their Second Amendment rights can be preserved, and we can still, adopt some common sense measures that make it more likely that we reduce gun violence and violence in general.
Was there any particular issue during the discussions today that you guys are completely opposed to? I mean, you talked about what you both agree, but was
Go
there
ahead.
something particular that you're far off?
The one thing that we're opposed to is that a one-size solution fits all. This solution has to be comprehensive. You have to address all aspects of it. And if you don't, for instance, banning high-capacity magazines is not a solution that in and of itself is going to solve the problem. It may be part of a big solution. I'm not totally convinced of it. But unless you do the research, find out why the violence is being committed, you really can't make a solution to it. You can't come up with a solution to it. Anybody else?
My name is Michael Katz. I think the bottom line with this is that there is no easy, quick, universal solution to a problem of violence in this country that has been in the making for at least 100 years. What we need to do are to have balanced measures and steps taken which will in the short term reduce the risk and which give us hope that in the long term we may come to a solution that balances everyone's rights and recognizes everyone's responsibility to one another.
And I think the bottom line message here is that we believe it can be done, and that it is not just the usual suspects who, have spent years fighting to pass gun control measures that believe that